Hello, Ellen Mailing, and welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Francisco. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Ellen, you and we've never met, but you met a very good friend of mine. I think maybe only for like 10 minutes. But she found you to be a most interesting creature, which actually I believe that we all are in our own way. And she told me that you used to live in Asia for many years. Now you're an American. And then somehow destiny called you to live and work in Asia. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I reached a point in my life. I was living in Alaska then in Anchorage, Alaska, and I felt like it was well, there were a number of different things that sort of factors that all convalesced, but ultimately it became clear to me that I wanted to do something different with my life. And I had some criteria about where I wanted to leave the country. I mean, a part of that was um, precipitated by a review of a bunch of old journals that I'd had in the basement. And I realized as I was kind of cleaning those up and leafing through those during a short stint of unemployment that I'd always, like in junctures of life, thought about leaving the US and living in a different country. So once I solidified the plan with that, it was really a question of sort of identifying the criteria. I needed to have some decent access to healthcare in my,
Mm-hmm.
just turning 50 and live with type 1 diabetes. So that's
Mm.
another big factor. Yeah, so then I started putting feelers out there and I had a bunch of options that I was sifting through, and Plan C turned out to be uh, an opportunity to teach at a rural school in Thailand. So that was through an agency.
So you moved to Thailand and you're in a rural part of Thailand, as you said. What was that like?
Well, it was about five hours by bus between Bangkok, Thailand's two major urban centers of
Oh,
Bangkok and Chiang Mai. So I
mm,
lived, it was a, small city along the uh, river, big, major river. I remember it as the Mae Nam Ping is in Thai, how you pronounce it. But, um, and it was an experience. There was just so much new elements of this experience. So I was in a small school. They had a very structured Buddhist practice as part of this private school. And I was pretty much the only foreigner in the entire community, like the only American.
when you say structured Buddhist school, um, are we talking about things that one needs to adhere to, like certain practices throughout the day?
Yeah, we often started with the school assembly. So, we'd have all the students together and we would chant a very, traditional Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
chant every morning to open the school day.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um,
I'm asking
and
because I went to
there
Catholic
was
school.
education. It was so it was a faith-based type of school,
Yeah, right.
but it was, with Buddhist practice and not, yeah.
Was it a strict school? I'm
Well,
asking.
it all depends on the standards of strictness. So I would say that, you know, um, parents would pay to bring, have their children there. I mean, it was
Mhm.
affordable, I believe. Um, so it couldn't, and it was not, it was a day school. It wasn't residential. Um, so they had a lot of structure, but there was also, I would say that children were a little wild. sometimes.
Oh,
So,
I'm asking because I went to Catholic school and
uh-huh.
it was strict and very structured. I did try going to public school for some years too, and I did see a difference.
Mhm.
At least in the Catholic school, at least the ones that I went to, there was a they had more control over students. But I'm sure that just it all depends. You know, every school has a lot to offer.
Yeah.
Um, and so you were an English teacher for six. No, no, no. You were there for a certain amount of months.
Yeah. Well, my contract was 8 months, and so actually I arrived there at the start of the school year in November, um, and then I had a basically a 6 or 8 week period that I was off. I actually did all kinds of other adventures during that um, time away from Thailand, but and then I came back. So, it was a lot of navigating in a different culture alone. And I think one of the most challenging things that I remember is just really not being able to have very strong visual grounding about where I was from signs, right?
Oh, of
So,
course.
because
Right.
all this, they're all in
It's
a
in Thai.
completely different alphabet than
Mm-hmm.
what we're
Right.
used to. So,
Right. Well, how interesting that is. Right. Right. Did you have challenges because of your diabetes?
I would say that I was well stocked when I left. So I had brought a lot of medication with me, and so that wasn't too much of an issue. And actually, I ended up being probably one of the more healthy periods of my life because I always say, like, I wasn't, drinking a lot because it was a small community. I had to like drive my motorbike to get, to the supermarket or whatever. And of course, being like the only, one of the few foreigners in the community, and of course being, you know, female and affiliated with the school, I just didn't feel comfortable drinking a lot. So there was like no beer, no bread, no cheese, and I ended up like losing 25 pounds during that
Mm.
time frame, which was, and I did a lot of bicycle riding. There was a great ancient Buddhist temple that was right across the street, old forest temple that had these beautiful trails, roads that you could ride your bicycle on, and all these great birds and lots of ecosystem sorts of things. So it
Now,
was, yeah. So the health wise, myself was on a very regimented approach that I have had a hard time duplicating since. But
now I have some friends that are Thai, and I love Thai cuisine. I could eat that every day. I could eat that every single day, and I'm sure that that with no matter where you go, if you have an illness, one is just concerned. Nothing against the culture, nothing against the cuisine
right.
or anything of the sort, but you're in new surroundings and you want to be healthy and be able to enjoy it. What about in terms of camaraderie? Did you feel lonely? Did you feel excited? Did you find happiness in being by yourself?
hmm Well, it was I was fortunate that I had a very supportive teachers, and administrators of the school. So it was a family owned school. They would often,
Mm,
invite me out for things
mm,
to learn, try new foods, and their English was passable, so I could kind of understand what I was eating. Um, but I will say I often went to like a night market, right? So they have these markets, and they were selling kind of dry goods and household stuff, but they also have like a big pavilion, I guess, for lack of a better term, of food vendors. So that was always kind of a really experimental approach on, being able to say, okay, like if it's this color, like bright red, it's going to be probably too spicy for me, right? But the Thai
For you.
palate is completely, you know, they're much better accustomed, like many local palates. You know, the spice differential is pretty ramped up. So there was more than my share of experimental eating. But I was like I said, I have been really fortunate my whole life to be pretty even keeled in terms of my diabetes management. So
That's great.
I always had mechanisms to correct if I wasn't kind of on track. So I think it was more, I guess it was just a little bit easier for me to go with the flow, but I definitely learned quickly what what was better for me to eat than not.
So after Thailand came what?
Well, so the interesting story is, I guess, I had a very long break in the school year during the Thailand experience, and I was also turning 50 years old. So I had a friend that was living in Tanzania, and I actually went to see her in Tanzania, and it turned out my mom and my sister and my nephew also came over. We did a safari over there, etc. So my friend, the expat in Tanzania, after my family left, we had a lovely little dinner with a bunch of her expat friends, and they're like, "Oh, Ellen, what are you doing now?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm, teaching English in Thailand, but I'm not going to do that forever, and I don't quite know what's next." And so one of them said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I used to work in Cambodia, and I have some other contacts in different Southeast Asian countries, so I can shop around a resume and see if what might open up." So I was like, great. And actually, I got an invitation from an organization, fellow in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, to go over there and just, do some volunteer work, check it out. And it was like, it was a really night and day experience for a number of reasons, mostly because a lot more people spoke English. It was very easy to be a foreigner in Phnom Penh than it was to be in rural Thailand. But I had the chops, so.
And you were working as?
Yeah, I was doing some volunteer work to get started and get oriented. But I ended up picking up one contract, and then I ended up picking up a job working in a U.S. Organized charity hospital in Phnom Penh. And I'd had some previous experience doing fundraising and project management in healthcare in Alaska. So it was a good transferable skill.
And how do you define charity hospital?
Well, basically, I think there's a few different elements to that definition. One is that it is almost always organized by a faith-based NGO organization, and two, they are offering free medical care to poor people, basically. So when individuals have exhausted they just don't have any money. They've often spent most of their money on ineffective care from other providers, and so they would show up at the hospital. And the organization that founded the hospital had been in the community for a very long time, so it actually had a very parade, for lack of a better term, of international volunteers coming through. So there were a lot of Cambodian medical professionals that had really good levels of training based on that. So it had a great reputation, really throughout the entire country, but certainly in Phnom Penh.
When I think of a hospital, any hospital, I think of the obvious, which is illnesses, fears. It's a scary place. I'm sure it came with its challenges being surrounded by a stressful atmosphere. It doesn't matter what country.
Mm.
How was that for you? Not because you're an American, but because you're human.
Yeah. Well, it's like the duality of life, right? There's a lot of suffering and sometimes dying, but there's also recovery and healing and
Right.
continued life. So, I think from my perspective, there was another layer of frustration. One recognizing that there were systems that created many of the ailments that people were coming to the hospital with, meaning they weren't getting effective antibiotic treatment, as an example, or they weren't able to have a appropriate diagnosis for cancer. So they would try to do their best to muddle along and then show up before it was just too late, really, to do much for them, and with a limited capacity to actually provide, drugs that might extend their lives a little bit. So, but also, I mean, one thing about Cambodia in general, certainly in Phnom Penh, is how young the entire population is.
I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, one of the big factors in the reason why Phnom Penh had such a prevalence of English and was well suited to foreigners was largely due to the Khmer Rouge regime. And if you really remember, this was a despotic regime that took over after a number of times of civil war and basically did their best to eliminate anyone who wore glasses or who had an education. And they sent, a large majority of the population out to the fields in this attempt to, return back to agrarian roots. And so what you see is about, 20% at least, probably more, of the population died in that 5 to 7 year period during the genocide. So, that's why you would see a lot of people like my age as an example, because they would have had to survive somehow through that incredible experience.
Now, this aside, you are also an artist.
I would not call myself an artist. I would call myself a creative spirit, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could we define that? What type of creativity do you like to express?
So I have been a prolific journaler and have actually a blog called ballandchain.net that I had maintained pretty steadily when I was in Cambodia. Not as rigorous since I left. I have come back to the States. But so I just, I like writing and drawing and thinking and doodling and I think part of that is a creative spirit of life. Like I am not a tradition. I have never lived my life in a traditional fashion. It has definitely been wandering around doing things that most folks wouldn't do, and not having what one might call a traditional lifestyle, meaning married, never married, no kids. I'm just out there doing it. So.
Did you feel that your time in Asia brought out a different side of your creativity?
I think that that sense of being a little bit unsettled and on the move, and a sort of a, seeing all of this new stuff really helped uh, trigger a lot of creative work. Um, and I think also there's an element of the yeah. So it just was sort of realizing that you're kind of in a different slipstream of culture and life, and you're an observer. You really have to be very focused on observation and trying to listen carefully and interpret. Sometimes if you don't have the language commonalities to get into the nuance of that fundamental universal human experience.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to America, what was that like?
Hard, very
Could you
hard.
could you share how and why?
Well, one of the funny. So I came back largely due to elderly parents and wanting to be a little bit closer to them, and I moved to a small community here in Maine. Uh, Vastly different culturally. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that was one big thing. And other thing was just like, oh right, having been away for that long, it was sort of getting used to, and I'd never lived in Maine before, right? I had
Mm-hmm.
um so yeah, things like the car, registration, getting a car and registering it and figuring out how to drive again, and snow, and you know all
Oh
that other
yes,
sorts of stuff.
snow. I forgot about that phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it took me a little while to settle in, to some extent, although I don't really feel like I've completely settled.
Hmm.
I still, I don't have a lot of stuff because I've always been thinking, oh, I'm going to go off and do something different
Mm-hmm.
again. So,
How do you feel that your time in Asia changed you? What do you believe you learned from your time in Asia?
I think, even looking at the traveling, I mean, I did a lot of travel when I was there too. So I learned, I think, a very strong sense of both fierce independence
Mm.
and the need and desire for human connection. Um, so I did a lot of solo work. So, you have to, the kind of approaches that you bring to solo travel are such where you definitely have to be a lot more in tune and a lot more aware of your surroundings and be prepared for all sorts of different, scenarios that you may face. Um, so I might have gotten a little bit too independent, and I certainly became very comfortable as an introvert, um, too. Like you just have to do a lot of self entertainment and figuring out how to, you know, make your own fun, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But also great to interact with people too. So and learn from them and those experiences.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. What a blessing. Ellen Mailing, thank you so much for sharing your story with me and with anyone watching this video.
Great. Well, I wish you the best success in this, Francisco. I think it's a great project, and hopeful that you'll continue to find other great personalities.
Thank you.